Going in today?
Yeah, so.
It does. Oh yeah, I was talking Okay, it's 9:30, so find your seat. We're gonna go ahead and get started here. Sunday morning, Sunday school. So Zach is in the back. We're studying the book of Zach today. Zechariah. Krista, is that his real name, Zechariah?
Zachary.
Zachary.
It's like this.
So I guess, well, we're still studying the book of Zach. All right, so good morning, everybody online too. Welcome. Chris is at Bible camp this week. So my job today is to make you appreciate his teaching ability. And your job is to talk a lot. So last week, Chris was talking about the first chapter of Zechariah. And so we'll review just for a minute. We said that Zechariah means the Lord has remembered. And so he remembered his people. Because where was everybody at for 70 years? There was an exile.
Babylon.
In Babylon. What's Babylon known for? Anybody remember what Babylon's known for?
The Tower of Babel.
Right, the Tower of Babel's Nimrod and all of that, and we changed the language. That was known for that. Anything else? Anybody remember what Babylon's known for? Well, there's the Hanging Gardens were very famous back then, but I was looking for walls. So in ancient times, walls were really important. What do you think they were important for? Besides keeping the captives in. Protection, defense, right? So there was also some other not so good things they were known for. Pagan worship. Does anybody know what god they had that was 280 feet tall, the shrine? Yeah, I just looked it up. It's Marduk. It was a shrine 280 feet tall. So they were right on the Euphrates River. And some historians say the wall was like 14 miles around. Big wall. Defense and to keep the captives in. So why did God allow his people to be taken to Babylon and Jerusalem destroyed? Anybody? Hey, Rob.
Because they had turned away from God and was idol worship.
Right. So they were taken captive, and there were walls around Jerusalem as well at the time that they got taken captive. Those were destroyed. God allowed the other country, the Babylonians, to go in and just destroy everything and take captive the people for their evil ways, turning away from God. One more thing that I had written down about Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar II. He further fortified the city with 3 rings of walls 40 feet tall. So you weren't going to get out of Babylon if they didn't want you to get out. There was no way to get out of there. And so they were there 70 years. You think 70 years that, and everybody is worshiping Marduk and all these pagans. I think that's probably kind of tough for them to still worship God, right? All right. See if we got any more review here. So, starting in about 520 BC, Cyrus the Great, he was a Persian. He took over Babylon. He conquered Babylon, and so he allowed, and I think this is all God, of course, allowed the Judeans to return to the ruins of Jerusalem. And so the temple had been destroyed, and God, he brought out 2 powerful preachers, Haggai and Zechariah. So you're a powerful preacher, Zach. It's a good name to have. We also have Zach Smith, but he's not here today. So you got to be the only Zach in here today. So Zach, do you remember last week we talked about Zechariah? He was a Levite priest, but he had never actually seen a temple that was fully constructed. So they had been gone a long time. It had all been destroyed. But God sent Haggai as a prophet and Zechariah. And so in Ezra 6:14, it says, and the elders of the Jews built and prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the son of Iddo, and they finished their building by decree of the God of Israel and by decree of Cyrus and Darius and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So the temple had been destroyed in 586. Reconstruction began in 536. Okay. So Zechariah, he's preaching to the people because their morale was kind of low. They came back and they're in ruins. They're trying to scrape out a living. So he's preaching to them, and he reminds the people. He's calling for the people to turn back to God. Return to me, and God said, and I will return to you. So Zechariah is preaching to them, reminds them that all restoration must begin and continue in the heart. And the Jews were just, like I said, scratching out a living in the ruins of Jerusalem. And so their optimism was not too good about this stuff. And so initially they did pretty good for a few months but eventually there was like a 16-year period where nothing got done. So that's why God sent Zechariah and Haggai to get these people moving and get them working. So last week we talked a little bit about the first 2 visions that Zechariah had. I don't know what the difference between a vision and a dream is, but probably the same thing. I guess you just know if it's God telling you in a vision. But the first vision was the 4 angelic horsemen traveling on the earth and reporting that all the earth was resting quietly. That's in Haggai 2:6-9. And if you wanted to look that up, and it said that God promised on behalf of Jerusalem to shake the nations. So he's talking about not to be worried, because God's not going to let the people that scattered them before do it again. So that's the message it's trying to get to the people to get them moving. And then he had another vision. the vision of four horns, and they represent the political power or the ruler that had scattered the Jews. And Chris talked about that last week. God's message was that the Jews just doesn't have to be concerned anymore about the invaders or anybody, because God's craftsmen were going to deal with those powers. So I had a couple of visions that we talked about last week. Now we're going to move into chapter 2 of Zach. So it's against this backdrop that Zechariah's efforts take place. Again, Zechariah is at the heart of God's rebuilding, the rebuilding of the temple, but more importantly, the rebuilding of his people. The prophet delivers 8 divine visions, 2 oracles, for the purpose of turning the people's hearts back to God. The thrust of Zechariah's message is that God's blessings are contingent upon man's loving obedience. Zechariah shows God's people what the future holds. A day and time when the Messiah would reign supreme. Jesus will provide a fountain, Zechariah 13:1, which will flow from his pierced body, Zechariah 12:10, so that all of God's people may have cleansing for their sins. Christ the King will supply these living waters, and that's in Zechariah 14, that will flow out of Jerusalem over all the earth. So, he has a third vision, Zechariah does. So I'm going to read that. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a man with a measuring line in his hand. So I said, "Where are you going?" And he said to me, "To measure Jerusalem, to see how wide it is and how long it is." And behold, the angel who was speaking with me was going out, and another angel was coming to meet him, and said to him, "Run, speak to that young man, saying, Jerusalem will be inhabited without walls." So we are with the walls again. "Because of the multitude of men and cattle within it. For I, declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire around her, and I will be the glory in her midst. Ho there, flee from the land of the north, declares the Lord. For I have dispersed you as the four winds in the heavens, declares the Lord. Ho, Zion, escape, you who are living with the daughter of Babylon. For thus says the Lord of hosts, after glory he has sent me against the nations which plunder you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For behold, I will wave my hand over them, so that they will be plunder for their slaves. Then you will know that the Lord of the hosts has sent me. Sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming, and I will dwell in your midst, declares the Lord. Many nations will join themselves to the Lord in that day, and will become my people. Then I will dwell in your midst, and you will know that the Lord of hosts has sent me to you. The Lord will possess Judah as his portion in the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Be silent, all flesh, before the Lord, for he is aroused from his holy habitation. So that was Zechariah 2:1-13 that we just read. Sorry, I should have told you that before. You're probably looking around going, where is he? So, chapter 2 begins with another vision of a man with a measuring line. So we talked about the walls that held them in, that were destroyed by Babylon. We talked about the walls in Babylon where they were held captive. So how do you think these people feel now that God's telling them through Zechariah that they're not going to have any walls anymore?
Anybody? So they're used to having walls,
Should have been a feeling of freedom.
right? Feeling of freedom. See,
I think it would be kind of tough at first because you're so used to that security of having walls, and now they're not going to be there. Now you have to depend on your faith. And I think a lot of times in our lives we're the same way. We like to put those walls up because they make us secure, but God calls us for Him to be our wall.
So it took a lot of faith. Stu said it's going to be difficult for them. So how many people have fences around their yards right now? I know I do. We all build walls, right? We build fences, walls. Hey, Rod, you got something to say?
I was gonna say that, they kind of learned 70 years before that walls didn't really matter. Walls didn't keep the Babylonians out. So what's the purpose of building a wall?
So do we use walls in other ways? Maybe to put up walls so people can't really see who we are, maybe, or people from knowing us better, or sinners, how much we sin. So there's physical walls, and then there's the invisible walls we put up. Sometimes those walls that we put up to protect ourselves actually keep us from doing things. Jerry?
Actually, this is an illusion of something that's not physical anyway. Spiritual, but at this particular time, Jerusalem didn't have any walls. Nehemiah hasn't come back yet. And when he does, they prepare it in 52 days. So this is a vision of far-reaching from the physical Jerusalem itself, because it couldn't actually be measured.
So it's more of a
Spiritual wall, right? And God said, I'll be the fire around you guys. I won't let anybody come in. So you need to trust that I've got you, that you don't need a wall, right? Anybody else? So the temple and the people need to be rebuilt. Zechariah delivers some divine visions for purpose of turning the people's hearts back to God, and God's people and God's blessings are contingent upon man's loving obedience. Morale was low, so you get the picture. The construction was halted for a long time, so there needed to be something happen. Zechariah is delivering his visions that God's given him to the people, and they probably don't totally understand a lot of it, or they probably thought it was a physical wall, maybe that's what they're used to, but they need to have faith. Get used to not having the walls there and just start building the temple. So we like walls. They provide protection. We talked about that, and God says, "I'm your wall. I got you." So like Zechariah's audience, we too have a glorious future awaiting us. We are going home. John described it figuratively in these words. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them. And they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away. Revelation 21. So, the New Jerusalem, described in Revelation, it's like 1,500 miles wide and 1,500 miles long and 1,500 miles high. So, the city made of precious stones. These people didn't know that. all they're looking at is all the rubble and how are they going to survive. And they're getting some visions from the preacher. And they're like, I don't know about this. I don't want to get to work if there's no future in it. There's just somebody's going to come destroy us again. I want to believe, but go ahead, Karen.
Jerry brought up a good point. I'm just curious from this vision of Zechariah, how much longer, you might know, Jerry, till they did actually, under Nehemiah, start building the walls. I don't know.
I don't know if Jerry remembers that or not.
He might.
They came back, the first wave came back, and they spent 14 years. They went to work, but a short time, and then 14 years later, that guy comes and stirs up the people. And Zechariah and Haggai are contemporary, so
Yep.
this is the same time frame. They've got, what they actually did was they used the materials they were supposed to be building the temple with and started building their houses out of it.
Started building their own houses. I wrote down that the second temple was completed in 516. So, we'll go over the fourth vision. Zechariah's fourth vision begins with Joshua, the high priest, and Satan, and ends with a picture of the Messiah. The high priest stands as a symbol of the redeeming power of Jehovah.
And Satan had been behind the sins of the priesthood. As the priesthood was defiled, so were the people. Satan believes he has won. And in this fight of good versus evil, the devil claims victory. He feels as though he has separated the people from their God, and Judah no longer has fellowship with Jehovah God. The Israelites, however, were a brand plucked from the fire. It says that in Zechariah 3:2. Satan only thought he had won. Though the people had endured the punishment for their disobedience, God was not finished with them. So Joshua is a representative in this vision of not only the priesthood, but all the people of God. His garments are filthy because they are stained with the sins of the people. And God says to remove the sin-soaked garments, Zechariah 3:4. This was symbolic of God's power to forgive. God would have the final say in whether his people would be restored or live in exile, not Satan. God's grace is on full display as the high priest is clothed with clean garments. This not only symbolizes the loving forgiveness God has toward his people, but it also stands as a new beginning for Israel. Verses 6 and 7 of chapter 3. It reads, "And the angel of the Lord admonished Joshua, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, if you will walk in my ways, and if you will perform my service, then you will also govern my house, and also have charge of my courts. And I will grant you free access among these who are standing here." So, the people have been forgiven. Satan, as well as the conquering nations, have been defeated. And now it was up to them to live a lovingly obedient existence, not staining their garments again. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Like over and over. It's true for us too, right? So the fourth vision closes with the prophetic picture of the coming Messiah. Verses 8 and following read, "Now listen, Joshua the high priest, you and your friends who are sitting in front of you. Indeed, they are men who are a symbol, for behold, I am going to bring my servant the branch. So who's the branch? Anybody know who the branch is?
Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. For behold, the
Stone that I have set before Joshua, on one stone are 7 eyes. So there's something that's kind of hard to understand, but you remember a stone being mentioned anywhere else? Cornerstone.
Go ahead.
The cornerstone in the New Testament.
Yes. Jesus was
Also considered the cornerstone, right? The one on which the church was built. So I have one set for Joshua. One stone are 7 eyes. So eyes usually represent some sort of intelligence, right? It says, behold, I will engrave an inscription on it, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of the land in one day. And that day, declares the Lord of hosts, every one of you will invite his neighbor to sit under his vine, under his fig tree. So he's kind of talking about the Messiah here, right? I mean, that's what it lends itself to. And I guess the Jews are still waiting for the Messiah. But we know what happened. And so, can you see the cross in these verses? Anybody?
Yeah, I think we can say that the branch, the stone, cornerstone, all of those things, the forgiveness, the fact that he's going to do it in one day, remove the iniquity, all those kind of.
All that kind of language lends itself to.
So is all of this a messianic prophecy?
I think it is.
God's dealing with the people of Israel was just a snapshot of the future deliverance that would come through Jesus Christ. The perfect Lamb of God would come to this earth to live, to serve, to die, and to rise from the dead. Sin, death, and Satan would be defeated once and for all. The branch has its root in David. Jesus is a shoot coming from the house of Jesse, David's father. Thus, he fulfills the promise made to David in 2 Samuel 7:12 through 16. Anybody want to turn to 2 Samuel 7:12 through 16? Anybody have it?
When your days are complete and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come forth from you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will correct him with the rod of men and the strokes of the sons of men. But my loving kindness shall not depart from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever.
Thank you. So the 7 eyes.
Could be represent that he's all seeing. Anybody got any ideas about that? I mean, that's pretty straightforward, I guess. I don't know. A stone is strong, and it's solid, and it's enduring. Peter wrote, behold, I lay in Zion a choice stone, a precious cornerstone, and he who believes in him will not be disappointed. That's in 1 Peter 2:6, where we talk about the cornerstone. The Apostle Paul stated that Jesus Christ himself, being the cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit. Ephesians 2:20. So Peter talked about it. Apostle Paul talked about it. Seems like that stone is the cornerstone. Phil?
In Acts 4, Peter and John told the Sanhedrin, you know, Jesus is the stone you builders have rejected, which has become the cornerstone, and salvation is found in no one else. There's no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. So even though they were told that Jesus was the cornerstone, they still rejected it. And same is happening today. There's people that reject Jesus, which is the only way to salvation.
All right, so for those online who couldn't hear him, that's still happening today. The cornerstone is still being rejected. It was Acts 4 that he was quoting there. And so, thanks, Phil. So, he's also the linchpin upon which our entire spiritual livelihood is founded. He has purchased the church with his own blood. He founded it member by member by removing the filthy garments and giving us festal robes. So what's in Zechariah and what's in the New Testament are definitely linked together. Of course, I had never really studied Zechariah 2 or 3 that hard until I had to get up here and talk about it. And then I started realizing, okay, that's definitely connected together. So we talked about the fourth vision, the third vision, talked about walls, talked about God is going to be the wall for them. So Zechariah is trying to get them motivated to start building again and to trust in the Lord, trust in God. And that's pretty much 2 and 3, chapters 2 and 3, and then next week Chris will go into chapter 4. So what I'm going to do for you this week is I'm going to give you extra time to visit. Go ahead, Karen.
Understand in chapter 3, verse 10, the very last verse. In that day, what is that day? Declares the Lord of hosts. That every one of you will invite his neighbor to sit under his vine and under his fig tree.
Right, so Karen's asking, what is that day in that day, declares the Lord of hosts. So to me, I don't know, you can see what some of you others think, but to me that sounds like when Christ is crucified and raised from the dead, but that's just the way I take it. Up to that, or go ahead.
Sounds to me like there's a time coming when the oppression, nations is stopped, and the children of God are given rest. So it sounds to me like it might be our salvation in heaven.
Sure. Those that couldn't hear that sounded like maybe no more worry about being invaded or being taken over by an enemy, but I think it all depends on them being obedient to God and turning away from God, because that's what got them into the exile in the first place. Was they had turned away from God, so He allowed punishment to happen. But as He brought them out of the exile and back to Jerusalem, they had a lot of work ahead of them. They were trying to scratch out a living there, and things were kind of tough. And so Zechariah was sent to try and inspire them to get busy and build the temple, worship God. Don't just sit around and mope and say, well, our lives are ruined now. I always wondered about the 70 years, how hard that was and how much that changed them, being trapped inside Babylon's walls and watching all of the pagan worship all the time, and how tough that would have been to, all these similar kind of stories, the Daniel stories, how he, I'm sure.
When you were reading that, and it talked about 70 years, and one story the book brought up was about being homesick. You and I were talking about how, I don't know how you would be really homesick after 70 years. I've been gone from Virginia for 40, and I'm not homesick for Virginia. But, you know, this is home now. And so that, I guess what they were homesick for was what they were told by their parents and grandparents. The life, the temple, and how wonderful Jerusalem was. Is that how you would take that?
Yes.
So, do you think any of the people that went into exile for 70 years were homesick to go back to? Go ahead, Phil.
Probably the way they would have been was homesick for a place to worship. Because a place to worship was important to them. That was, in their minds, the only place that God existed was in the temple. And so that's probably what they were homesick for, was a place to worship rather than the actual place. I mean, as far as Jerusalem goes.
Go ahead.
If I can go back to verse 10, Jesus is the true and living vine, and as we get closer to the Lord and we invite our neighbor is anyone who we come in contact with, we will invite them to come under his vine and under his fig tree, not my vine or my fig tree, but because he is the true and living vine, we invite others to that same kind of relationship that we have with God. In Jesus.
Right. So she's saying that for those that couldn't hear,
That we should be inviting people, our neighbors, but not to ours, but to the Lord, right? And to church. Any other thoughts on that? Hi, Michelle. Thousands. Michelle's saying there were millions that were taken into captivity, but only thousands that came back. Yeah, that's right. They do assimilate people when because they scattered them. I mean, most of them went to Babylon, but I think some went to other places. But yeah, there's probably a lot born there too. Born in Babylon, it was even tougher. I mean, they probably tried to teach them their intermarriage. Yep. Diane.
There is a psalm, it doesn't indicate who the author is, but I always remember this one, Psalm 137. It says, you allow me to read it. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and we wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it, for there those who carried us away captive asked of us a song, and those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. So they did yearn for to go back.
So there were thousands that came back, millions that left. It's very sad, and some of them were assimilated, and so it was a big job for Zechariah and Haggai to try and preach to them, you know, that this is you need to rebuild this temple now. The thousands that were there.
The Psalms 137, that's great. I never had read that they kept it alive by talking to their family and crying about Jerusalem, weeping of what they've left. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so there's a song we sing all the time, Marching to Zion. I know that's
Kind of an uplifting song. I would assume that the ones that did come back, most of them, there were a lot of leaders there, believers, but they had turned away from, been punished, turned away from God, so they had to restore themselves back into God's good graces and to be obedient. So, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, for us to think about, obviously, with the messianic mention there.
right.
I was just gonna ask Diane, so it sounds like what you were just reading, our tormentors saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion, that they actually were a good example to their tormentors, or the Babylonians, by their lifestyle, many of them, and what with their songs they sang to the Lord.
So does anybody think that maybe some of the Jews that went to Babylon in exile actually maybe were a good influence on the pagans there? That maybe some of them started thinking, oh, these people really believe in their God. But at the same time, their God allowed you to be captured and taken away. So that must have been a tough way to try and explain why they still had faith in that situation. And I think we are in that situation today a little bit, trying to tell people why our God is so good, and some people are just not interested in hearing. We can invite them, right? Invite them to church, let them hear the word. Usually we can do that part, but then God goes to work trying to get in their hearts, right? Any other thoughts? Okay, we're going to give you an extra 4 minutes today to visit. So thanks, and Chris will be back next week.